Hi everyone, my name is Richard Santoro and I welcome you to Third and Zen, the YouTube channel where every week we're sharing a spiritual message to nourish ourselves, heart, mind, body, and soul. First, thanks for stopping by the channel. Thanks for checking out today's video. I do hope this video finds you doing well. I do hope you're taking the time to care for yourself, heart, mind, body, and soul. Now, with that being said, I'm going to jump right in today because I have a little bit of a bigger message and a couple of things I want to say about it first. So, I hope you're in a space where you've taken a breath and you're prepared for what we're going to receive today with the message. I want to give a brief little introduction about this message. I delivered this message in a little bit after November of 2016, right after the presidential election of Donald Trump. So it was a very divisive time leading up to the election, and then it wasn't very pretty after the election, and things haven't been Shangri-La since then. So this was a message I delivered in response to a lot of what had been going on. If you watched my previous message that I downloaded on the channel, that I uploaded on the channel, Why, which I'll put a link in there, the title of the video was Why, you could see that there were seeds of that. There was a little bit of that social awareness vibe in that. And this one really is what that's about. Now, when I knew this was a message that was coming up on my list, and a lot of it does pertain to what was going on then. And as I was looking at the message, it's how do I change it so that it's still relevant? I mean, a lot of these themes and what's in this message is still relevant. So I did my best to alter it a little bit. And then I was maybe just going to talk about the message without delivering the message. So I landed on, let's just do the message and maybe, tweak it along the way as it goes. So that's what we're going to do today. So deep breath. Here we go. So, some years ago, Marvel comic books, put out a storyline that became a massive comic book story success. It proved to be a pivotal and seminal moment in comics and was eventually retold in the 2016 movie Captain America Civil War. Now, you might have seen that movie, but let's just talk briefly about the comic book itself. The basic gist of the story is this, that all the good guys, all of the heroes, they are split over cooperating with the government on a very controversial move. Half of the heroes feel one way, half feel another, and both sides feel that they are right. And everyone splits into two sides, one led by Iron Man and one led by Captain America. And Spider-Man, the beloved Spider-Man, he's caught in the middle of these two sides. Now, at a pivotal point in the comic book story, Spider-Man is talking to Captain America. And he asks Captain America, how do you deal with it? When everyone is against you, when it's all bearing down on you like a 10-ton weight, how do you react when everyone goes a different way? Captain America's response to Spider-Man, in my view, is one of the most elegant, beautiful, and soul-strengthening pieces of literature that I have ever read. And I think that we do all need to hear it, especially back in 2016, and yes, especially now as well. Captain America says to Spider-Man, hold your head up. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Doesn't matter what the press says. Doesn't matter what the politicians or the mobs say. Doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else, the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. Again, the year I wrote this, 2016, was probably the most decisive social year of my lifetime, maybe perhaps many of ours. In our country, it was divided. It was torn apart, really, and it bore witness to an ugliness that I had never seen before, and at the time, it only continued to get worse and worse. Now, a note here. I was raised by a mother who planted me like a tree by the river of truth and taught me about equality and the value of all human beings and ingrained in me to deplore the dangers and ills of racism and anti-Semitism and homophobia and all of the like. I was also influenced by a grandmother who stood up in her neighborhood, her local Methodist church where she worked and served for years, and the larger New York State Methodist Conference. And when racism and sexism and other isms reared their ugly head, she said, no, you move. She stood up to that. And I do my best to model my life and my ministry and my daily living after Jesus, who looked at the ugliness in his society, who watched how people bullied and persecuted and threatened others based on what they deemed to be lesser qualities, and he said, no, you move. And our job today and every day, as Christians and as human beings, is to plant ourselves like a tree by the river of truth and say, no, you move. I don't care who anybody voted for in any election. It really doesn't matter at this point or back in 2016 when I wrote this. With what goes on in our society, with what has gone on in our society, we need to plant ourselves like a tree by the river of truth and say, no, you move. When we hear people generalize and judge any group such as Muslims or refugees and they are called terrorists, or black people are referred to as thugs, or Mexicans are referred to as drug dealers and rapists, when we hear transphobia or homophobia or any type of belittling, dehumanizing, or bigotry, and so on, it is our job to say, no, you move. When we hear people shame and condemn our younger generations and refer to as lazy or entitled or babies or snowflakes or anything like that, it is our job to say, no, you move. When we hear people callously dismiss the fears and emotions and pain of anyone on any side, it is our job to say, no, you move. When we hear about any group of people who feel unsafe, unwanted, unprotected, and feel that their lives don't matter, it is our job to say to those threatening, ignoring, or dismissing their concerns, no, you move. When we hear people tell any woman that she isn't empowered or that she can be groped at will, it is our job to say, no, you move. When we hear about children in schools, and this is what happened right after the election in 2016, when we hear about children in schools, including third graders at the time at my godson's school, and all throughout the country at the time yelling, build a wall to other kids, it is our job to say to parents, teachers, administrators, and every member of our community when things like that happened or when things like that continue to possibly in that same vein still happen, no, you move. At the time in 2016, and there are things that have still gone on since then, are still going on like that today, high school students at the time bullying minorities and handing out deportation letters, college students starting lynching websites with the names of a black freshman and hanging them up at apartment buildings in Queens where tenants were handing out eviction notices that say, this is our America now. Things like that were happening then and have sort of continued to happen since then, and we're still a little broken in those ways. When we hear about instances of anyone in any way, shape, or form attacking, physically, verbally, or otherwise, Muslims, Hispanics, Jewish people, black people, the differently abled, women, LGBTQ individuals, or anybody who others feel are different and choose to attack them, it is our job to say, no, you move. No, you move. And also when we hear about white supremacy groups who then and now have emerged and feel so much more empowered and emboldened and handing out KKK flyers all around. That's a thing where I live. That's happening and has been happening. And attacking homosexuals, blacks, Hispanics, Jewish individuals, Muslims, or anyone who looks different or they deem different. It is our job to say, no, you move. Again, I don't care who anyone voted for. It doesn't matter anymore now, just as it didn't then. It doesn't matter whether any candidate has our level of what we deem it to be the appropriate amount of decency, humanity, or integrity. What matters is if we have decency, humanity, or integrity. Reports of hate crimes and attacks against all of the groups that I mentioned spiked dramatically back in 2016 and are still very much an issue today. The problem has not gone away. It's been even more empowered and emboldened. And if anyone doubts that, if anyone is skeptical of that, I'd be happy to direct you to the credible resources and agencies who track such things. Right now, we need to plant ourselves like a tree by the river of truth and say, no, you move. Right now, we need to step up like Jesus. Plant ourselves between the person who is cowering on the ground and the people with the stones and say, no, you move. Jesus, as the Gospel of John says, is the way, the truth, and the life. If any of us are to call ourselves Christians, if any of us are to model our lives after his, if we are truly to call ourselves his followers, we must stand up like he did, and we must say to injustice in any fashion, no, you move. We must be the example. We must be the person who puts ourselves between the victim and the crowd with the stones like Jesus did and say, no, you move. We have been and continue to be in a very pivotal time in our lives and in our society's history. It's on us, plain and simple. As Dr. King states, history will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. Let's not make that mistake. You know, at the time when I was preparing the sermon, when I found out that I was going to be preaching, I was actually going to be preaching on Thanksgiving weekend, that Sunday. And it happened to be, at the time, the first Sunday of the season of Advent. And at the time, I had a very nice, easy message that came to mind. Advent, getting prepared for Christmas, etc. But when I did look around at things in our society, quickly things were going haywire, as they had been almost every day and every week, and it still, in many ways, hasn't stopped. And at the time, I started thinking about a different message, not a less soft and easy message, something, a little bit like this. And at the time, I prayed, I meditated, I walked on the beach, I went to my beloved Arboretum. I really, at the time, if I'm being honest, wanted to go the easy route. A nice, normal, soft, palatable sermon. But everything at that time, in my reflections, everything in my spirit-led conscience told me that I just couldn't. I had a choice, and I knew that I couldn't take the easy way out. All I could think about was, what would my grandmother say? What would my mom say? What would I say to my godson, who at the time was in 3rd grade? What would I say to him years from now? And I couldn't help but think about every moment of Jesus's ministry. Every moment where he had a choice, the easy way or the hard way, the difficult way, the challenging way. Standing up for what is right or not standing up. It wasn't easy for him, but he did it. And pretty soon at that time, I made up my mind to deliver the message that I'm delivering now. As challenging as it may be, because that is what Jesus did. And that is what we are supposed to do. Now, let me give us our last act closing out this sermon, this message. Norman Rockwell. My original plan, as I alluded to with a nice easy sermon, Thanksgiving-ish Advent season sermon at that time, my original plan was to use this image, I'm getting it off my phone here, this image from Norman Rockwell on the cover of the worship bulletin that everybody gets on the Sunday. This very famous image, as you could see here. It's called Freedom from Want, part of Norman Rockwell's Freedom From series, Freedom from Want. This very famous, iconic, idyllic view of America, of Thanksgiving. But when I decided to go this route that I'm going now with this message, this more challenging route, I opted to use this wonderful piece, one of my favorite pieces of artwork from Norman Rockwell, known as the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule. It's such an amazing piece of art. And as I was meditating and praying about how to end this message, how to bring this challenging message in for a landing and close it out, Norman Rockwell is what came to mind as I was thinking about it. Now, most of us know Norman Rockwell. We know his iconic images, which were covers of the Saturday Evening Post. That's what he did. They are very much ingrained in our minds, and in many ways have shaped our view of America and what made America great in a very romanticized, idyllic way. But there is something that most people don't know about Norman Rockwell and all of those lovely, idyllic images of America. The Saturday Evening Post really limited Norman Rockwell. They wouldn't allow him to get political in any way, and more importantly, they very much limited how he depicted American society. Bobby, I'm doing a message here. Sorry, Bobby, the cat still is wanting attention. So the Saturday Evening Post were limiting Norman Rockwell's output, wouldn't allow him to get political in any way. For example, he was never allowed to depict a black person in the same way that a white person was depicted. Black people always had to be depicted as subservient or waiting on white people, if you can believe. It's really quite sad and disturbing when you think about it. And this was a limitation that was placed on many illustrators at the time, not just Norman Rockwell. Publishers wanted to put forth a very idealized and a very white view of society. And this was a real crisis of conscience for Norman Rockwell. He did his best to sneak people of color and ethnicity into his pieces in positive ways. But eventually, he became more and more aware of what was taking place in our society during the 1950s and 60s, and the plight of minorities and black people in this country. The pain that he felt over this and the restraints placed on him to depict a rather unrealistic image of the fullness of society, it began to haunt him, and eat away at him, and it even made him suicidal. Eventually, close friends and his wife convinced him to end his time and tenure with the Saturday Evening Post so that he could be free to do what he wanted and what he felt was right. Now, this image, I'm going to pull this up here. This image, right here. Okay, let me just tap that so we can get rid of that. This image, called The Problem We All Live With, was painted by Norman Rockwell in 1964. At the height of the civil rights struggle. It was his first piece painted for his new employers, Look magazine, who placed no restrictions upon him. Now, in this image, it depicts 6-year-old Ruby Bridges being escorted to elementary school by U.S. Marshals during a period of desegregation in Louisiana. And this is all true. This is all true story. You can go look this up if you're not familiar with it. And as you can see here, it depicts white people throwing tomatoes at her, as it's depicted there. This is a true story, and it's not an isolated one. And sadly, getting close right here, the N-word can be seen clearly written on the wall. This iconic image of the civil rights movement now hangs in the White House, or at least it did at the time. And Norman Rockwell went on to create other powerful, moving images of the civil rights movement and what was really happening in our society. For years, he was told to be silent. He was told to ignore his conscience and ignore what was happening, and not to convey to all of America what so many people were struggling with and being put through by other members of our society and the institutions of our society and by society as a whole. It tore him apart. And finally, again, he decided that he must make a hard choice. He stood up, and like Jesus, he put himself between the victims of hatred, cruelty, and bigotry, and those who would throw stones at them. And with his bold actions and his communication through his expressions of art, like Captain America, in essence, he said, it doesn't matter what the press says. Doesn't matter what the politicians or the mobs say. Doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else, the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. That's our job. It's not easy, but it's what we're supposed to do as human beings and as followers of Christ. As a clergy member that I know once said, there is a higher, wider, more external kingdom that we are moving toward. But I believe it is incumbent upon everyone who claims to be a disciple of Jesus to point out the places where we are straying from the path toward building that kingdom. Any construct any construct in which people that God has made are victimized, marginalized, and trivialized is inconsistent with the will of God. And that is why, back then and now, I made the hard choice to stand up and remind everybody that we all need to be like Jesus, and we all need to stand up and say, no, you move. When someone is cowering and being victimized, it doesn't matter who we voted for. It doesn't matter our political ideology or leanings. We all have to stand up like Jesus and say, no, you move. When someone is being bullied and persecuted for their race, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation or identification, their age, their faith, their gender preference, their political affiliation, or for any reason whatsoever, it doesn't matter who we voted for. We all need to stand up like Jesus. We need to put ourselves between them and those who would throw stones at them and say, no, you move. We need to make the hard but right choice and plant ourselves like a tree near the river of truth and stand beside Jesus as he commands people to drop the stones, as he commands us all to love one another and say, no, you move. Thanks be to God. Amen. Okay, my friends, I want to thank you for stopping by the channel. I want to thank you for checking out today's video. I hope that this video in some way, that you found this message fruitful. I hope it moved you in some way. I appreciate you if you watched it from start to finish. This was an important one for me, a personal one for me. But regardless, I wish you nothing but peace and fellowship with God on your journey. I pray that you find companionship with Christ. I pray that you find comfort, healing, faith, hope, whatever it is that you might need in your journey. I pray that you find it and know that you are loved and worthy of love. Again, thanks for stopping by the channel. I love you all. Have a great day. Ciao.